It was 3:12 a.m. when the screaming started. In the far corner of the solitary block, something slammed hard against the metal door, 3 sharp bangs that echoed down the hallway like gunshots. The guards froze. The air was thick and humid, heavy with the smell of bleach and rust. Then came the sound of dragging, slow, scraping, like boots sliding across concrete. But no one was supposed to be in that cell. When Officer Delgado finally gathered the courage to check, his flashlight flickered. The beam fell on a man's outline pressed against the cell wall, thin, shaking, eyes sunk so deep they barely reflected the light. His lips moved, whispering something no one could understand. "They took me," he murmured. "They took all of us." By the time backup arrived, the figure was gone. Only the deep scratches remained on the concrete, lines that spelled one word over and over again: ghosts. That was the night Rikers Island earned its new nickname, the prison that turns men into ghosts. 6 months earlier, Marcus "Slim" Alvarez had been sentenced to 8 years for armed robbery. He wasn't a killer. He wasn't even that tough. But he had a full chest tattoo of angel wings, a reminder, he said, that every man needs a way to fly out of hell. When the ferry first carried him toward Rikers, he felt the weight of the city fade behind him. The skyline of Manhattan looked small, distant, almost peaceful. But ahead, surrounded by dark water, stood a world built out of concrete and razor wire. Inside, the noise hit first, metal clanging, voices shouting, doors slamming. The place felt alive, like a beast breathing around him. The inmates called it the Island of the Forgotten. Some said if you stayed too long, you'd start hearing voices. Others said it wasn't voices, it was echoes of the ones who didn't make it out. Marcus tried to keep his head down. He shared a cell with a quiet, older man named Reggie, who had tattoos running up his neck, a black snake curling into the shape of a cross. Reggie had been there for years. "You listen to me, Slim," he warned one night. "This place ain't a prison. It's a trap for your soul." At first, Marcus laughed it off. But after the first week, laughter became rare. One morning, a guard dragged an inmate named Jamal out of the shower block, shaking and pale. His body was covered in bruises that no one could explain. He said he'd seen someone in the mirror behind him, someone who looked like himself, but wasn't. The next day, Jamal vanished from the medical wing. The official report said transfer, but the inmates whispered a different story. By night, the prison changed. The hallways echoed with things that didn't belong. Footsteps when no one was walking, whispers in the pipes, shadows that moved without light. Marcus started losing sleep. Every night, he heard the same noise outside his cell, the faint dragging sound, like someone crawling slowly down the hall. Then Reggie disappeared. The guard said he'd been moved to another block, but his bed stayed empty. His cup was still half full of water. And scratched into the metal frame of his bunk were the same words Marcus would later see on that cell wall: "They took me." After that, Marcus stopped talking. He spent his nights sitting upright, tattooed arms wrapped around his knees, staring at the shadows under the cell door. He thought he saw faces there sometimes, faces that looked like inmates he'd seen before, men who were gone now. By the 3rd month, even the guards looked nervous. Officer Delgado started avoiding Marcus's tier. He said it was because the cameras kept glitching there. Footage would cut out for exactly 60 seconds, then flicker back on, and every time it did, something small would be different. A chair turned around, a door half open. Once, Delgado swore he saw Marcus standing outside his own cell, just staring into the lens. But the log showed Marcus was locked inside the whole time. One stormy night, when thunder shook the island, Marcus woke up to the faint hum of electricity cutting out. The lights died. The fan stopped spinning. In the darkness, the dragging began again, closer, heavier. He pressed his ear to the door and whispered, "Reggie?" No answer. Only the sound of breathing on the other side. Then, a voice, low and broken, whispered through the metal, "It's your turn." When the lights came back on, Marcus's bunk was empty. No one ever saw him again. Weeks later, a guard found deep scratches inside Marcus's cell wall. Same as before. The same word repeated, carved into the concrete with bloody fingers: ghosts. And from that day on, every new inmate who arrived at Rikers heard the same warning before the cell door slammed shut behind them. Don't listen to the walls. They talk back. The morning after Marcus disappeared, Rikers Island woke to a heavy silence. It was strange for a place known for chaos and noise. Usually, there were the sounds of cell doors slamming, guards shouting, and inmates arguing about nothing. But that day, even the walls seemed to be listening. Officer Delgado leaned against the cold metal railing above cell block D, staring down at the tier where Marcus had once been. His coffee had gone cold hours ago. He couldn't stop thinking about the way the cameras had frozen the night before. 60 seconds of static. When the footage came back, Marcus was gone. No struggle, no blood, nothing. Just gone. Some of the guards joked about escape. Maybe he dug through the floor, one said. But Delgado knew better. You don't escape, Rikers. No one ever has. That afternoon, a new inmate arrived, a young man named Deshaun Carter. 22 years old, fresh from Queens. A stick-and-poke tattoo of a crown sat crooked on his neck, the ink faded and uneven. He was nervous, the kind that tried to act tough but couldn't hide the tremble in his hands. His sentence, 6 years for burglary and assault. His assigned cell, D13. Marcus's old cell. When Delgado saw the assignment on the roster, he hesitated. You sure about that? He asked the sergeant. The sergeant shrugged. A cell's a cell. He needs a bed. Move him in. Deshaun stepped into the narrow concrete room, the smell of bleach still thick in the air. The walls were gray, the bunk rusty. On the far side, near the corner, faint scratch marks still lined the concrete. He ran his fingers over them, tracing the letters with quiet curiosity. Ghosts, he whispered. Man, what the hell kind of joke is that? That night, he couldn't sleep. Every few minutes, he heard tapping from somewhere. Soft, rhythmic, like someone drumming their nails on the pipes. Tap, tap, tap. He banged the wall once. Yo, cut that out. The tapping stopped. Then came a whisper. Don't listen. Deshaun froze. He stared into the darkness, his breath fogging in the cold air. He told himself it was just another inmate messing with him. But deep down, he felt something else, like the air itself was breathing. The next morning during breakfast, Deshaun sat alone, picking at his food. Across the cafeteria, an older inmate named Lionel watched him closely. Lionel was a big man, bald, covered in tattoos that told his life story, teardrops under his eyes, a pair of dice on his hands, and a broken clock over his chest. He'd been on the island longer than anyone else. Some said he'd stopped counting the years. He walked over and sat across from Deshaun. You in D13? He asked, voice low. Yeah, Deshaun said, chewing slowly. Why? Lionel's eyes darkened. That's Slim's old cell. Who's Slim? Lionel leaned closer. The last dude who stayed there. Said he heard things. Seen things. Then one night, poof, he's gone. Guards say he escaped. But you don't escape from Rikers. Deshaun frowned. You trying to scare me? Lionel shook his head. I ain't gotta try. That cell's cursed, man. The whole block is. Deshaun laughed nervously. Ain't no such thing as cursed. It's just jail. People lose their minds in here. Yeah, Lionel said, staring into his tray. That's what we all thought. By the second week, Deshaun had stopped laughing. The tapping came back, every night at the same hour. Sometimes it was behind the wall, sometimes under the floor. Once, it came from inside the air vent. And each time he shouted, the tapping stopped, only to start again closer. He told the guards, but they ignored him. Delgado just looked tired. There's nothing in that cell, kid. I checked it myself. Just keep your head down. Deshaun wanted to believe him, but the feeling in his gut said otherwise. One night, a heavy storm rolled over the island. Thunder cracked above the roof, and rain pounded the windows like fists. The power flickered, then went out completely. In the dark, Deshaun heard breathing. Not his own. This one was slow, ragged, coming from the corner of the cell. He turned his head toward the sound, heart racing. Lightning flashed through the small window, lighting up the room for just a second. And in that second, he saw it, someone crouched in the corner. The figure looked human, but pale, almost see-through. Its eyes were empty sockets. And on its back, faint lines spread like wings, tattoos glowing faintly under the lightning. Deshaun stumbled backward, his body slamming into the metal door. The figure didn't move. It just tilted its head and whispered, "It's your turn." The lights came back on. The cell was empty. The next morning, Deshaun refused to leave his bed. He told the guards he was sick. When they opened the door, they found him shaking, staring at the corner. Delgado sent him to the infirmary for evaluation. Later that day, Delgado reviewed the camera footage again. And just like before, there was a blackout, exactly 60 seconds. When the feed returned, Deshawn was sitting up, staring at the camera lens, his lips moving slowly, repeating something over and over. Delgado turned up the volume. The words were faint, distorted by static, but still clear enough to hear. They took him. They took all of us. Back in the infirmary, Deshawn lay awake on the cot, eyes darting toward every shadow. The nurse gave him medication to help him sleep, but he never swallowed it. He didn't want to close his eyes, because every time he blinked, he saw the same pale face, the same tattooed wings. At lights out, he heard someone humming softly in the next bed. It was an old inmate named Terry, in for manslaughter. His arms were covered in small tattoos, dates, names, and phrases that looked like prayers. "You seen it too, huh?" Terry whispered. Deshawn turned his head. "Seen what?" "The man with the wings." Terry's eyes glistened in the dim light. "He comes for those who forget who they are. This place feeds on that." "What's that supposed to mean?" Deshawn asked. Terry smiled weakly. "You'll see. Rikers don't punish the body. It eats the soul." Deshawn didn't sleep that night. Neither did Terry. By the following week, word had spread across the cell blocks. Inmates whispered about cell D-13, the cursed room. Some claimed to hear voices through the vents. Others said they saw shadows moving when no one was there. Delgado tried to request a transfer for Deshawn, but the sergeant denied it. "We don't give in to ghost stories," he said. "He stays where he is." That night, Delgado patrolled the hallway alone. The prison was quieter than usual. Even the rats seemed to be hiding. He stopped in front of D-13 and stared through the narrow window. The cell looked empty. He was about to move on when he noticed something. Movement, faint but real. A shadow crossing the far wall. He leaned closer, flashlight trembling in his hand. The light caught the wall, fresh scratches glinting under the beam. Someone had carved a new word beside the old ones. Not ghosts this time. It read, "Still here." The next morning, Deshawn was gone. No one saw him leave. The cell door was locked from the outside. His clothes were folded neatly on the bunk, and the scratches looked deeper now, almost like they'd been burned into the wall. The warden ordered an investigation, but like every other disappearance on Rikers, it led nowhere. The files were sealed, the cameras wiped. Delgado was reassigned to another block, but he never stopped thinking about it. At night, when he drove home across the bridge, he swore he could still hear tapping under the tires, soft, rhythmic, the same sound that haunted cell D-13. Tap, tap, tap. He tried to ignore it, turning up the radio. But when he glanced at the rearview mirror, he saw something behind him, just for a second. A pale figure sitting in the back seat. Eyes hollow, wings tattooed across its chest. Then it was gone. Delgado slammed on the brakes, heart pounding. The bridge was empty. The city lights flickered in the distance, but the darkness around him felt alive. He didn't tell anyone. Not his wife. Not his colleagues. But that night, when he closed his eyes, he saw Marcus. Then Deshawn. Both standing behind the cell door, whispering the same words, over and over. "They took us. Now we take them." That was the last time Officer Delgado ever reported for duty on Rikers Island. And from that day, inmates began calling D Block by a new name, the Silent Block. Because every man who spent a night there never came out the same. It had been 3 weeks since Officer Delgado quit Rikers Island, but the prison never truly left him. He still woke up at 3:12 a.m. every night, the same minute the screams began that night in D Block. Sometimes, he swore he heard the faint tapping again, even though he was miles away. He tried to move on. He took a desk job in the Bronx, stopped wearing his old uniform, and avoided anyone who mentioned the island. But no matter how much he tried to forget, the same thought kept returning. What happened to those men? Marcus, Deshawn, the others, all gone. One rainy evening, Delgado sat in his apartment staring at the muted TV. The sound of the storm outside was steady, the kind that reminded him of Rikers. He took a sip of whiskey, but the shaking in his hand made the glass rattle. Then his phone buzzed. Unknown number. He hesitated, then answered. Delgado. A low voice came through, rough and urgent. "You need to stop asking questions." He froze. "Who is this?" "Not on the phone. Meet me where it started." The line went dead. Delgado stared at the phone, heartbeat rising. He hadn't asked anyone anything. Not out loud, at least. But maybe someone knew he'd been thinking about going back. He looked out the window. The rain fell harder. In the reflection, just for a moment, he thought he saw someone standing behind him. Tall, pale, wings on his chest. He turned around. No one there. He knew he shouldn't go back. But he had to. 2 days later, Delgado parked just outside the old staff entrance of Rikers Island. The gate was chained shut. Officially, parts of the facility were being closed for renovation, but everyone knew the truth. It was being emptied because too many guards refused to work there. He cut the engine and stepped into the cold air. The island smelled the same: salt, rust, and damp concrete. The silence pressed on his ears. Near the gate stood a man in a black hoodie, hood pulled low. Delgado recognized him immediately. It was Lionel, the lifer from D Block. "How the hell did you get out?" Delgado asked. Lionel's lips curled into a tired smile. "They transferred me. Guess they finally realized keeping me there wasn't helping anyone." He looked older now, eyes hollow, tattoos fading into gray. "You came back." Delgado nodded. "You called me." Lionel looked away. Didn't have much choice. "They don't like it when people talk." "Who's they?" Delgado asked. Lionel hesitated. Then, he pulled something from his pocket. A folded, water-stained paper. "You didn't hear this from me. But the truth's in the file. The one they locked in the basement. Medical wing. Block F." Delgado unfolded the paper. It was a copy of an old report. Yellowed, stamped confidential. At the top, a familiar name, Marcus Alvarez. Below it, a note written in pencil. Subject shows signs of disassociation. Reports of auditory hallucinations. Exposure recommended. Delgado frowned. Exposure to what? Lionel stepped closer. His voice dropped to a whisper. "That's what you need to find out." Before Delgado could ask more, Lionel turned and walked into the fog. That night, Delgado used his old badge and contacts to sneak into the abandoned section of Rikers. The guards at the checkpoint didn't question him. They barely looked up. It was like the place had drained everyone of energy. The corridors were darker than he remembered. His flashlight beam cut through the dust, catching rusted bars and broken signs. Somewhere in the distance, water dripped rhythmically, echoing like footsteps. He made his way to Block F. The door was chained, but the metal gave after a few hard hits with a wrench. Inside, the hallway was lined with medical files scattered across the floor. Most were shredded or burned. But at the far end of the room was a steel cabinet labeled Psych Eval, Restricted. He opened it. The smell hit him first. Old paper, mold, and something metallic. Inside were thin folders, each marked with an inmate ID. Alvarez, Carter, others. Names he remembered. He flipped through them quickly. Every report had the same notes. Patient exhibits visual hallucinations. Complains of hearing voices through walls. Transferred to isolation for observation. And then, at the bottom of each file, status, expired. Delgado froze. None of these men had died officially. The reports never mentioned death. Just expired. Suddenly, the lights flickered. A cold draft swept through the corridor. He turned around, heart pounding. The door he'd come through was now half closed. Then he heard it. Tap, tap, tap. The sound came from the far end of the hallway. He raised his flashlight. The beam caught a smear of dark red along the wall, like someone had dragged their hand across it. He followed the trail, step by step. It led to a heavy steel door with a single, small window. Inside, it was completely dark. But when he looked closer, something moved. A hand, pressed against the glass. Then a face. Marcus, pale, hollow-eyed, staring right at him. The tattoos on his chest, those angel wings, glowed faintly in the light. His lips moved slowly, forming words Delgado couldn't hear. Delgado stumbled backward, flashlight shaking. "No, that's not possible." The lights flickered again. The hand on the glass vanished. Then came the whisper. "Still here." Delgado ran. The hallway seemed longer than before, like the building was shifting around him. The tapping grew louder, now coming from all directions. He burst through the door and didn't stop until he reached the outside gate. When he finally reached his car, he sat shaking behind the wheel, breathing hard. He looked down at his hands, blood on his fingertips. He hadn't noticed cutting them on the cabinet, but the blood wasn't his alone. On his wrist, faint but visible, were red lines forming shapes, wings. He rubbed them, panicking. They didn't fade. Back at his apartment, Delgado spread the files across the table. There were dozens of names, each one matching an inmate who'd disappeared. He noticed something new written in the margin of Marcus's file. Small letters, in a handwriting that wasn't official. The project continues. He turned the page. Another note. Rikers Unit 13, successful. Energy retention confirmed. Energy retention? He frowned. What the hell were they doing in there? He grabbed his phone and called a former colleague, Officer Renee Vega, who'd worked in the Rikers medical unit years ago. She sounded surprised to hear from him. Delgado? You okay? I heard you left. I need answers, he said quickly. What was Unit 13? Silence on the line. Renee? She exhaled. You shouldn't be talking about that. They shut it down years ago. It was a psychological program. Some kind of experiment on inmate behavior. Sleep deprivation, isolation. They said it was for research. Research into what? Another pause. How long it takes to break a man's mind. Delgado's throat tightened. And the disappearances? They didn't disappear, Carlos. Her voice dropped to a whisper. They died. But their bodies didn't. The line went dead. Outside, thunder rolled again. Delgado stared at his reflection in the window. The faint outlines of wings still marked his wrist, glowing softly under the dim light. He turned off the lamp, hoping the darkness would hide it. But when the room fell into shadow, the glow only grew stronger. And then he heard it again, faint, just behind him this time. Tap, tap, tap. He turned around slowly. In the corner of the room stood Marcus, his eyes hollow, his lips barely moving. They took us, he whispered, voice thin as air. Now we take you. The lamp exploded. The room filled with light and shadow. Delgado screamed, but no sound came out. The tapping became thunderous, echoing through the walls, the floor, his own heartbeat. Then, silence. When the neighbors finally called the police the next morning, they found the apartment empty. The door locked from the inside. On the wall above the table, written in what looked like soot and ash, were two words. Still here. And on the table lay a single piece of paper, the last page from Marcus Alvarez's file. At the bottom, in handwriting no one could identify, was a new note. Subject Delgado, exposure complete. The morning after the riot, the island looked like it had stopped breathing. Smoke drifted across the yard, black and thin, curling above the broken fences. Sirens wailed in the distance, but they sounded tired, like even the alarms knew there was no one left to save. Detective Lena Ortiz stepped off the ferry with her badge in her pocket and her heart pounding. She'd worked homicides for 12 years, but she'd never seen anything like this. The reports made no sense. Guards missing, inmates vanishing, security footage looping the same minute of silence over and over. When she walked through the gate, the stench of burnt rubber and blood hung in the air. The silence was worse than any sound. A correctional officer met her at the door, face pale and shaking. It's like they disappeared, he muttered. All of them. 1 second they were here, the next gone. Lena didn't respond. She had seen enough to know that when people said gone inside Rikers, it never meant free. Inside the main block, the walls were scorched black. Chains lay twisted on the floor. Her flashlight beam swept across the walls, and there it was again. The same word, scratched deep into the concrete, repeating down the hallway like a chant. Ghosts. She stopped at cell 47. The door was half melted, metal warped by the heat. Inside, the bunk was empty. Only one thing remained, an old photo taped to the wall. It showed Marcus Alvarez and another inmate, Reggie, sitting side by side, smiling faintly. Someone had drawn black wings behind them in pen. Lena reached out and peeled the photo off the wall. Underneath it, scratched into the concrete, was a date, April 12th, 3:12 a.m. The same night the first reports of voices started. The same night Marcus vanished. Her radio crackled. Detective Ortiz, a voice said, "You need to see this." She followed the sound through the ruined hallways until she reached the surveillance room. Most of the screens were static. One, though, was playing something. It showed the riot. Men running, fire breaking out, alarms flashing red. Then the feed glitched. The image froze for exactly 60 seconds. When it came back, the cell block was empty. Every man, every guard, gone. Rewind that, Lena said. The officer hesitated. We've tried. It doesn't let us. Then pause it. He did, and in that one frozen frame, Lena saw something. In the back corner of the cell block, where the light barely touched, a shape stood tall and thin, like a shadow in human form. And on its chest, two faint white marks that looked like wings. Her stomach turned cold. By nightfall, the storm rolled in. Rain hammered against the roof, and thunder cracked like gunfire across the bay. The ferry had been grounded. No one could leave the island until morning. Lena sat alone in the command office, staring at the photo of Marcus. She pulled out the case file and flipped through the pages. The same names repeated: Jamal, Reggie, Marcus. All men who had vanished without explanation. Each one had drawn wings somewhere in their cell. She leaned back, whispering to herself, "What the hell were you trying to tell us, Slim?" A gust of wind rattled the windows. The lights flickered, and from the hallway outside came a sound: slow, deliberate footsteps. "Hello," she called out. No answer. She grabbed her flashlight and stepped into the corridor. The beam swept over peeling paint and flickering bulbs. The footsteps grew louder, then stopped. At the end of the hall stood a man, barefoot, drenched, head bowed. His arms were covered in tattoos. Angel wings. "Marcus," she whispered. He looked up, eyes hollow, his voice a whisper like wind over broken glass. "They said the island keeps what it owns." Before she could move, the lights went out completely. The beam of her flashlight flickered, and in that strobe of light and dark, she saw dozens of figures behind Marcus. Men, all covered in the same tattoos, all staring silently at her. The beam died. The hallway went black. She stumbled backward, heart hammering. She reached for her radio, but it was dead. The air turned cold, the kind of cold that felt like it was inside her chest. Then, in the darkness, Marcus's voice came again, close enough to touch. "You don't leave Rikers," he said. "You just fade." The next morning, the Coast Guard arrived. They found the prison half-burned, flooded with seawater from the storm. Every remaining inmate and guard was accounted for, except Detective Lena Ortiz. Her car, her badge, and her files were all found in the office. But she wasn't. When they reviewed the last working camera feed from the command room, they saw something strange. At 3:12 a.m., the power had flickered on for exactly 1 minute. The video showed the hallway empty, except for one faint shape standing by the wall. A shadow of a woman, barely visible, with faint white outlines behind her back. Wings. Today, Rikers Island still stands. The city says it's closing soon, but no one knows when. The ferry still makes its runs, carrying guards and inmates across that dark stretch of water. And every few months, another story leaks out, someone hearing whispers in the solitary block, or seeing faces in the reflection of the control room glass. And sometimes, late at night, officers swear they see her. A woman with tired eyes, walking the halls like she's still searching for something. They say she looks like Detective Lena Ortiz. They say she's not alone. Because if you listen closely, just before dawn, the island breathes. And in that breath, you can almost hear them whisper, "We never left." Rikers Island. A place meant to hold the broken, the lost, the dangerous. But for years, stories have whispered through New York, of voices in the dark, of inmates who vanish without a trace, of a curse that feeds on guilt. Whether you believe the tales or not, one thing is certain: every man who steps onto that island leaves a little piece of himself behind. Some leave their sanity, some leave their souls, and some never leave at all.